Hello, friends. It's time for another edition of the Gold and Steel Show, where we discuss all things Vegas Golden Knights. I'm JP. I'm here with my usual co-host Ian, and we're just doing a post-season wrap-up today after the Golden Knights' unfortunate first-round exit from the 2024 Stanley Cup Playoffs. It's a bummer, and it's a bummer to say this is kind of our last episode of this season. We'll probably do a couple of things during the off season. That's usually how we do it. But we were hoping for a deeper run, obviously, Ian. But let's just dig right into it here. What went wrong? What went wrong with this playoff series? Obviously, the Golden Knights lost to the Dallas Stars in 7 games. Super close series. And I have a whole lot to say about it, but I want to get your thoughts. Why were the Golden Knights not able to advance out of the first round?
Well, look, firstly, hello to all the listeners and viewers. And I echo your thoughts, JP, about it being a shame that it's kind of ended this way. We talked beforehand, and there's one thing to remember with this series is that there's a lot of reasons. We're going to talk about them later, but a lot of reasons to be still very optimistic about the Vegas Golden Knights, about what they did, about the way that they played.
Definitely.
I'm going to cover some of the stats in a bit, but the reality is there was nothing that massively stood out as saying, there's this area that was dreadful, because I just don't think they actually played that bad. It's just the downside of the Stanley Cups is that it's a really, really hard trophy to win. It's it's a super hard trophy to win if you're going to plop yourself up against arguably one of the best teams in the West in the first round, and we can cover that a little bit later. But I just thought it was a really tightly faced series. It was close. There wasn't many goals in many of the games. There wasn't the kind of blowouts that you tend to see in some of the playoff series that still go 7 games, but they tend to swing drastically one way and the other. This series didn't really feel like it was going to do that. The first 2 games probably lulled Vegas fans into a false sense of safety. But those that are more hardened veterans will know that it's only really game 4 can you start to think, okay, now I'm getting a kind of feel for what the series is. So I just think it was a real tough contest. And we kind of said this going in, both me and you, albeit one of us may have more rose-tinted glasses than the other, but we both kind of talked about it being 6 or 7 games. So going into that series, neither me or you or any of the Vegas fan base, to be honest, was sat there thinking Vegas in 5 or Vegas in 4. So, maybe they were thinking Vegas rather than Dallas, but they were still thinking 6 or 7. So I don't think it's that. Now, the downside of being in the UK is obviously I got to see all the games, but not at the same level that you did, JP. So I'm keen to flip this back to you. I've got the stats. I'm happy to run through the stats in a bit, but I'm keen. You're there. You're in the community. You're there with the fans. What do you think over those 7 games? Now you've had time to process the initial kind of bummer feeling of getting knocked out, and that kind of is that, because then you get that clear, like that clarity that comes with time, right? And being able to look back at the series, maybe a little less emotional now than if we'd have done this straight afterwards. So, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I know hockey is a no excuses kind of culture, particularly among the teams. And I think that's a good way to be if you're a player. I think as fans and as, sort of amateur analysts like you and I are, I think you do have to look and say what happened. And honestly, in the general manager's postseason wrap-up press conference, he said a lot of the same things that I'm about to say. So managers and people who are not players are going to analyze what went wrong. And I think it's very hard to talk about what went wrong in the playoff series without talking about what went wrong during the regular season. I think they're very closely connected. I think, obviously, the fact that the Knights lost so many man games, I think it was the second most in the NHL, and it wasn't even close. Massive amount of man games lost during the regular season. And they got healthy. And when I say healthy, I want to put that in quotes, because that means healthy enough that players were willing to return and be on the ice. But I don't think everybody was at their best health-wise. I don't think Stone was at his full capacity. The team had, that lineup of players hadn't played together really at all until the last 2 or 3 games of the season. So I don't think they had enough time that roster to dial their game in. Now, sure, brutal fans and Vegas fans that are less forgiving are going to say, well, that's just an excuse. And, on our X profile, I have one of the Golden Knights slogans that they have over their locker room. And it says, there are 1,000 reasons why, but there is no excuse. And I think it's important to distinguish the difference between looking at realistic reasons and assessing what happened and making an excuse. The Golden Knights are one of the best rosters, if not the best roster in the NHL. They probably should have eked out that series. So I'm not making excuses for them. That being said, I think health was a major factor. I think they didn't have time to have any chemistry with each other. That was a major factor. I think not having home ice advantage was a major factor. And let's face it, super close series. I was at game 3. And at that point in the series, one slightly different puck bounce or something, and we're probably talking about the Knights in the second round. So you know what I'm saying? That would have been Knights up 3-0. Almost certain, based on stats and the past, that they would have won the series had they won that game. Now, they did not have a good game. It was their worst game of the series. However, they managed to tie it up. And I was sitting on the Dallas end during the overtime period. The goal happened right in front of me. And let me tell you, it wasn't fluky, but it was a guy putting a puck through a space about this big. I'm talking about the overtime winner in game 3 that squeezed right between Logan Thompson's shoulder and bounced off the underside of the crossbar. When you got two teams that are that good, it is absolutely a game of inches. Dallas doesn't score that goal and Vegas does. Now they've got a 3-0 series lead. They almost certainly would have won the series. So I think it's important also to recognize that when we say what went wrong, it's not that the Knights, like you said, they did not play a poor series.
No.
Were they at their absolute best? Probably not. But pretty close. Like they definitely, game 6, they looked like they did last year. So you were starting to see flashes of it. And Kelly McCrimmon in his press conference said that it's unfortunate that they didn't make it out of the first round, because he felt like if they did, they were probably going to go deep. But that was what McCrimmon kept coming back to. They just didn't have a chance to get used to playing together, to find their stride, find their rhythm. And then look at game 7, right? There were a couple of wide open nets where the Golden Knights could have scored. It would have changed the game. And they missed those shots. And when there are two teams that are this evenly matched, it usually comes down to the team that makes one less mistake than the other. Bruce Cassidy in his post-game press conference after game 7, he said, basically, we came up one goal short. And that pretty much sums it up. We came up a goal short. The series was that close. It was the closest series the Golden Knights have ever played. They've had some series that go 7 games. They have never had a series that went 7 games. All the goals, the games decided by one goal. This was the closest series the NHL has actually seen in quite some time. So it's easy to hang your head and be like, oh, they shoulda. And then that brings me back around to, they had to pay the price a little bit, unfortunately, for not getting better results during the regular season, because one of the major disadvantages of squeezing into the playoffs as wild card 2 is that you have to face a juggernaut in the first round, and you have to face all the good teams, the best teams, all the way through. So seeding matters. You and I talked about this before we rolled. People say it's just about getting in, seeding doesn't matter. I don't agree with that. I think seeding does matter, and I think this is a good example of why it matters, because they had to face a contender, right? Dallas could win the cup, and you got to face them in the first round. And that really matters. And you know what? Even if the Knights had gotten out of the first round, they would have been pretty beat up from this series. Then they're facing Colorado. Let's say they beat them. They're pretty beat up by that. I mean, by the time they get to the cup final, if they make it that far, they are so worn down. They're just beat to crap by that point. Look at the Panthers last year. That's what the Panthers looked like. Squeezing in wild card 2. They had to kill themselves to get to the final. And by the time they got there, they were totally dead. They had nothing left. And the Knights dispatched them in 5 games. That's exactly right. So anybody who says seeding doesn't matter that's taking that hockey no excuses mentality. I get it. For the players, they don't need to focus on that. It doesn't help them. But as analysts and outsiders, seeding absolutely matters. And the Golden Knights
100%.
paid the price for squeezing in wildcard 2. It's a coin flip. You run that series again, maybe the Golden Knights get out. But when it's that close,
Exactly. And then when it goes to 7, it's whose arena is it in? These are small margins, but when you've got a series that's this close, those tiny little margins matter. So I agree that seeding does matter. And you can see that when you look at the bracket now, who's left on both sides, East and West. We're not going to cover obviously all of those games, but most people listening to this podcast are following it in some way, shape, or form. You can see the wildcard teams and how quickly they were dispatched. And there's a reason for that. It means that it does matter whether you finish. And it's stupidly like there's a few games at the end of the season. And look, it's 82-game season. So you can't blame the whole playoff thing. And this is where the excuses thing, I think the whole no excuses mentality is about holding yourselves accountable. It's not about not analyzing what went wrong, which is what McCrimmon effectively is doing. By saying things like, look, bringing a team together in the playoffs and creating new lines, new power play lines in the first game of a playoff series probably isn't the best way of doing things. No. Like, that's okay. That's an observation and analysis. It's not an excuse. It's an observation and an analysis. An excuse would be to say, we didn't win, not because we didn't play well enough, but because these factors out of our control. That's an excuse. And I think that's the biggest difference. I mean, I think about what I do in terms of my own kind of work life. When things don't work, you're trying to work out why it didn't work. It's not because you're excusing the fact they didn't work. It's just because you need to know, well, what didn't go right so I can make sure I don't do it again. Or so we don't do it again as a team. Mm-hmm. And I do think that one of the issues, I remember watching the first game, one of the very few that I actually managed to watch live. And it was the power play came out. And the commentator said something like, this is the first time this power play line has played together. It's a great sign. And I thought, no, it's not. Because it did actually score. I think that may have been the only goal that Thomas Hurtel scored. I think I know it is because I've got the stats in front of me here. But it worked in that instance. But that's not a good formula for playoff success. And when you're in a tight series like this, these kinds of tiny little things matter. So very quickly looking at the stats, JP, because I know that this tends to be my position when it comes to us on the podcast.
I love it. Hit me with it, man.
And I was trying to find like the smoking gun. I was trying to find something to say, okay, that's why this series didn't pan out because it was so close. It was hard. And initially I thought, well, maybe the goalies didn't perform as well as they could have done because they were good in the regular season. But, we have to accept that both Hill and Thompson, whose names I nearly butchered together then, but like Tom's Hill, but even the two of them, right? They had peaks and troughs during the season. Okay, that's just the way it goes. But they performed really, really well statistically, and their expected goals was much higher than their actual goals against. Their expected goals against was a lot higher than their goals against. So there's a site called Money Puck for those of you that are sad statistical people like me, and that allows you to see more than just the save percentage. So you can see high danger chances, you can see unblocked shots, you can see all this kind of stuff to understand in terms of the goalie, how are they performing more than just looking at goals against and save percentage. And the reality is both Hill and Thompson, and I'm not a massive fan of playing both, by the way. I've got this as one of my points to raise when we talk about the off-season later, but I understand the 1-2, but I think when you get in the playoffs, you have one. And I think one of the things we talked about, where after the deadline was about the Vegas Golden Knights selecting a goalie and favoring that goalie more times than they did the other one, not doing the whole 2-1, but almost doing a 3-1 in terms of saying to whoever it is, and statistically, they're both playing really well. So the argument is you could pick either, but I feel like having the two goalie tandem and playing them both. Yeah, I'm not a massive fan, but anyway, the reality is they both did statistically very well. So again, it's not like I looked at it and I went, okay, Thompson did great, but Hill did crap. Like they both played really well. The save percentage on unblocked shots was well above what the average is in the league. So again, when you look at the two of them, especially when you compare them to goalies that the league would very happily class as being elite level goalies, both of them played again, like we know that they can, but like elite level goalies. And I think one of the downsides of Vegas' success is that I don't think Thompson and Hill get enough credit. I didn't think Hill got enough credit last year. I certainly don't think that they had enough this year. So they played quite well. Now, going to the outfield players, and the ones that matter, I suppose, in terms of the goals side. I then looked at Eichel and I thought, okay, so how did Eichel perform? Well, he had 7 points, which means he was a point per game player. That's what you want from someone in his position. I'm okay with that. Could there have been more goals than assists? Well, yeah, but he's a center and arguably that's what he's there to do, is to do both. And his face-off percentage was above 50% but it was above 50%, which I thought, again, was really, really positive. The next two performers in terms of stats, so the highest performers, were Hannafin and McNabb, which again is a good sign. But when I tell you something in a little bit, you'll see why it's probably a double-edged sword. Because I would have liked to personally, when we're looking at points scored, if I've got two defenders as 2 and 3, that tells me that somebody in the front line wasn't scoring enough goals. Because you should really see people like Marchessault, who was the fourth, but people like him. Manta was brought in. You were expecting him to kind of deliver on points. He didn't really. Hurtle's another one. And that probably nicely takes us actually onto in my opinion, it's backed by stats, but this is my opinion. As people listening and watching this show know, we love the commentary. So please feel free to put your own thoughts in terms of who you thought performed well and who you didn't think performed well. And if you disagree with me, absolutely fine. Don't mind. Just we got rhino skin, me and JP. We don't mind. But you can say, Ian, you're in the UK. What the hell do you know? So Chandler Stevenson's the first person that I've got on my disappointment list. This is my school report, right? These are the people that could have played better. Stevenson, lack of points. I can't remember how many he had now, but I think it's 4 or 5. Not horrendous, but not enough for the number of minutes that he plays. The disappointment for me was Stevenson's face-off percentage was quite low. And this is a guy who, realistically, in the regular season, he drags the whole team's percentage up. And he's arguably one of the best face-off takers in the NHL. Yeah. One of Chandler Stevenson's biggest pluses is his ability to take a face-off draw. And I thought the fact that his percentage was so low is a sign of one of two things. Either he had a bad day or a bad series, or the Stars picked him out and they made sure that on their home ice games, when they have the last choice in terms of line, that they were matching him against a line that they knew the person had his number in terms of face-offs. Because that was surprising for me that he wasn't one of the top face-off performers. Yeah. Pietrangelo, again, really low points of production. I think he may have scored 1 point in 7 games. That's not enough. For a guy who, let's be honest, when Stone's not around, he is the captain, and given his amount of ice time to have such little production was a surprise. Thomas Hurtle, going back to your point, JP, about throwing people in and not having enough time to gel, that kind of screams volumes in his points production. 1 point in 7 games, which I think was the power play goal that I was mentioning earlier. Yeah. That's not good enough for a guy that is pulling down 7, 8, 9 million or whatever he's going to take down next year. Sure. And this guy's, I know he doesn't cost Vegas that because of we can cover cap stuff later, but the reality is he is a elite level NHL top 50 player, blah, blah, blah. So to rack up 129 minutes, that's top 6 minutes as he's a top 6 forward. So to score 1 point, I'm pretty certain it's 1 point, but I was really disappointed with him. And people can say, because we'll probably get in the comments below, but he brings more to the ice than just points. Yeah, but in games like this, 1 point, you go through and Dallas don't. So those points matter. And then the defensive contribution, my final point on the stats is defensive contribution was really, really low. Again, in my opinion, I've watched Vegas for long enough now to know that people like Theodore, people like Martinez, Whitecloud, they all contribute in the regular season. They all get points, Theo especially. And to have Martinez, Theo, and Whitecloud all registering nil points, right? So no points. And I think Martinez played 6 games. The other 2 played 7. if you're looking at what could have been better and who could have played better, I think those three would be looking at themselves saying, maybe we didn't contribute enough offensively. And maybe that's a sign of line changes. I don't know. Cassidy could explain that, but it surprised me because we all know Shea Theodore he's a two-way defenseman. He scores points. He's great going, as a defender as well. It's not like he's just an offensive defenseman, but he does score points. So for him to register nothing, I was really surprised. And then the last point, JP, so I lied, there's two, is the series came down effectively to 2 goals. When you look at the goals against and the goals for, there was 2 goals swing in it. Okay, I know that was across different games and blah, 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 but realistically, goals for and against, 2 goals. Statistically, Vegas have the lowest expected goals of any of the 16 teams in the playoffs. Now, okay, some of them have now played 7 games, so that's going to skew the stats very slightly, but the reality is Vegas are bottom. So if we're looking at it, I think, if I had to summarize the whole playoff series in one line, my summary would be they didn't score enough goals. They didn't produce enough points. Now, a whole host of reasons behind that, but the crux of it is Vegas score a few more goals. It's probably them sat in round 2, not Dallas.
Yeah. It's a perfect storm of things that came together. And, when you're talking about bounces and stuff like that too, Dallas scored 2 or 3. And there was one game where they scored 2 of them very fluky goals. Now, some people will argue, well, you just put pucks on net and good things happen. Yes, there's some truth to that. You put bodies in front of the net, you throw pucks in there, and you can create some chaos and you get some goals out of that. But these goals were fluky as hell. I remember if it was game 4, I think, the puck that bounced off the back of Logan Thompson's head and went into the net.
Yes.
You could take that shot 10,000 times and it would not go in. And then in that same game, there was another shot from a similar angle on the other end of the ice that bounced off of a Stars player's shoulder and went into the net. So, look, that's hockey. And it's
just to counter that. Sorry, JP, to cut you up, mate, but just to counter that, because I think the one thing that I would say on that, and this is probably the difference between your position is obviously, and you watch all these games, and you are an avid fan as you should be, and which means I can probably afford to be more critical than you can. What I would say to counter that, because I hear that same commentary a lot in my kind of professional life, which obviously will not a surprise to anybody. It's not just podcasting. So take for example, when I'm talking to somebody on the sales side, the second that somebody starts saying to me, if only this case had closed, my answer to them is always, that just tells me you didn't have enough cases. So I would agree with you. You can probably take that shot 100,000 times and it doesn't go in all but that one time. But the problem is for Vegas, the reason why that goal mattered is because they didn't score enough. So they have to hold themselves accountable. I know you're not using it as an excuse, but I think the risk is that you put the series down to bad luck, which I don't think it is. I think it was that Vegas, ultimately, when you look at the stats, probably performed. They performed badly, but they performed slightly below where they should be. There's a few players, the ones I've mentioned, who maybe performed below what they would class as being their bar. They perform at their bar. That goal's still annoying because it goes in, but you counter it with a goal that matches it off. I think ultimately that's what I would say is that it's not. I think they scored some fluky goals, but you're going to get that in hockey. And for me, it still comes back to they were just a little bit off. Whether that's a tough regular season, whatever that is, they were just a little bit off their best.
They definitely were. And the point that I was leading to is that's what happens when you play a team that's that good. Yeah. And so where I was going with that is ultimately it boils down to you squeeze in the second wild card and you get what you get. Like by squeezing in, and even just winning that game against the Ducks, they would have been playing Edmonton. Edmonton's also a juggernaut of a team, but Dallas, I think, had their number in a way that Edmonton might not have. I think they might have stood slightly better chances of getting through. But either way, what you want to be doing is you want to be in first and you want to be playing the second wildcard team, who might have been Nashville or some other team. So that's ultimately where I was headed is this series against Dallas should have been not just a Western Conference final. This is what you sometimes see in Stanley Cup finals. Two absolute juggernaut teams going at it, and their top players get neutralized because that's what both teams do, and it just comes down to like a fourth line grinder goal or a bounce. And so you are right. They needed to do better to get through, but they shot themselves in the foot by having to face Dallas in the first round.
That's 100% right, mate.
Because Dallas would be saying the same thing. If we'd beat them, Dallas would be saying, and Dallas, they did what they should have done. They earned the top seed. So very unlucky for them to have to face an opponent like Vegas. But let's face it, that's unusual. That's not typical for a team as stacked as Vegas to only squeeze in the second wild card, right? So, no, you're completely right. You just have to do better. But I ultimately still think what did them in is the seeding. You can't squeeze. That's why the second wild card almost never wins. They just don't win cups. Like it just hardly ever happens.
And the only time it happens tends to be when somebody has, like what Vegas has a poor regular season.
Yeah.
And arguably they're a better team than their league position would have you think. So they actually it's misleading the league position they're in as they go in, which you could argue, well, that was what Vegas had this year. But I'm just not sure that they were in a position that was out of kilter with their team. I think they were in a position that should have been out of kilter with their team. But 82 games is more than enough. We didn't see, remember the Blues when they won a cup? They were dreadful for the first half of the season. Then from December onwards, they went on this absolute tear, got into the playoffs. I can't remember what position, probably a wild card spot, given they were bottom at Christmas. Got into the playoffs, and then they were just on it the whole way through. That never happens. That's the reason why it was so special when the Blues did it.
What I recall about the Blues is they actually finished first in the NHL. They actually worked their way from the bottom. That's what was so extraordinary about it. And so they went into the playoffs
as the top seed
with good seeding, as I recall. And so, they were last in the NHL and then just went on a tear. Yeah. And I think, or they might not have finished first in the NHL, but they finished first in their division. Or something like that. They might. I don't think they got the President's Trophy that year, but they made their way all the way up to. I think they won their division at least, and so they got the best seeding or some of the best seeding they could have gotten.
And that's it. And whereas I feel that Vegas got the position they deserved. It's why I disagree. I know we're going to come to in a minute, but I disagree when people talk about players being intentionally kept on LTIR and stuff. It's just ridiculous because, they knew that they were struggling. That's why they made the moves that they made in at the deadline. They were bold moves, like bringing Hanifin in, bringing Manta in. Manta also, by the way, underperformed. The only reason I didn't mention him is because, to be fair to him, he did only play 3 games. But
he left injured, I think. I think
that's what I mean, and that's why I didn't want to criticize him that heavily because he could have scored a hat trick in the next game and totally changed his stats. But the moves they made at the deadline was a team that knew that they had to do something to kind of fire start their season up, and like you said, again, I think on the score report for the team at the end of the season will say it's unfortunate, but you put yourself in this position over 82 games, which they did. They put themselves in a position to face a Dallas, and the West is pretty strong. Let's be honest. I think the West has flip-flopped between being stronger than the East and not stronger than the East. And I would say I'm probably biased because I watch more West Coast games. But, when you've got teams like Colorado, Dallas, Vancouver, pains me to say, but Vancouver, you've got the Kings, who looked like a good team during the regular season as well. Okay, maybe not at the end, but they did beforehand. And Vegas. The West is stacked, so the seeding does matter, and I think ultimately they'll look back on this season and realize they put themselves in this spot. And I wouldn't be surprised next season if they don't look at the regular season for a very different lens now and start thinking, okay, you know what, we can't afford to maybe wait so long before we press the button. We've got to make sure we keep pace with whoever's top in the Pacific.
Yeah. It's interesting. And maybe we can segue a little bit into kind of what this means going forward. How do they learn those lessons? Kind of maybe what the plan is for the off season, and maybe we can work our way into some reasons to have a positive outlook. I mean, looking back when they missed the playoffs, and I remember this show existed. The Golden Steel show existed at that time when they missed the playoffs. And I remember saying this. I remember I said, and I should dig it up and try to cut it into this episode. Maybe I'll do that. But I remember saying, you know what? I'm not happy that they missed the playoffs, but I kind of think it's probably one of the best things that could happen to them. Yep. Because they're banged up. They've done all these deep playoff runs. They need the rest. And they need to come in and have a season where they're fully healthy and a bunch of guys aren't missing time. And that is exactly what happened. They came back. They had an amazing season and they won the cup. So just to grabbing for a positive immediately, I do think a long off season will do this team some good. There's no way Mark Stone was 100% healthy. You could tell he wasn't. He was healthy enough to be on the ice. So everybody says, oh, he's miraculously healthy by game one, right? That's the common narrative about the whole LTIR thing. No, he's not. It's that because of the moves they made, he can't come back in the regular season without them having to waive somebody because you can't make trades. And so basically it's like, okay, you can come back. The earliest you can come back is game one of the playoffs. And he's like, well, the doctors have cleared me. I don't feel great, but I'm a monster and I want to play. Right? That's what it boils down to. It's not, Mark Stone did not glide into this playoffs in full health.
Hell no.
He was working on a 60-70% tank. That was not full playoff Mark Stone by any means. And so, that brings me to some of the Vegas hate. And we knew this was coming, right? You get knocked out in the first round. Of course, people around the league are going to celebrate and dance and have a great, and chirp. But that comes with being a champion. Mm-hmm. You and I talked about this on the phone yesterday when we were prepping for this. This is a common human thing. Anytime someone else or another organization or another person is more successful than those around them, the people around them are going to look for reasons why it's either not fair or why they don't deserve it or why they didn't earn it. There's a million things that people come up with to make themselves feel better. It's common human behavior. And especially now with the internet and social media where people don't have to be accountable for what they say and they can just be anonymous and just spit random thoughts out into the ether. Of course, that's what people are going to say. And I think you mentioned, Ian, that it's almost become trendy to hate the Vegas Golden Knights. And I frankly, I don't think a lot of people even know why they hate the Vegas Golden Knights. I think they just regurgitate what they hear everybody else saying. And so we knew that was coming, right? But as you've said before, Ian, it means you're good. People don't hate losers.
It does. No,
so it should be a badge of pride,
It should be. It should be. Sort of, I can't remember who did the quote, but the famous quote about this saying that the average person in the world is a moron, and that means there's 50% of people that are even more moronic than he or she is. Right. I just think the problem with social media, one of the reasons why, for those of you that don't know, obviously I'm not on X anymore, but one of the reasons for that is because I just got sick of having to. I'm all, those that know me as well, I'm an advocate for free speech, but there's a point when, like you said, when it's just moronic spewing of crap. So the issue, I think, when it comes to Vegas is that they're a target because they're successful. You were 100% right in what you said a second ago. The only thing I would counter that is to say I think this is a new trend, and not a new trend as in like 5 years. This kind of all started around the financial crisis. And this whole mentality shift between seeing people of success as being people to hold on a pedestal and
emulate. Kind of,
that's the word I was looking for. Yes, emulate. Look at what they did right and say, you know what, I want to be that guy. Like I want to achieve what this person has achieved.
Yeah, that's inspiring.
That
to me.
rhetoric, kind of that narrative changed to now being that guy doesn't deserve what he or she has got. And or they cheated, or they lied, or something. It's never like this. You see it all the time in in business, like a CEO will get a bonus of a couple of million. Everyone's like, he doesn't deserve that bonus. And you're like, you have no idea that person's career, the sacrifices they've had to make, the luck that and hard work and talent and everything else that goes into that. And I think you get that in sports now, like the first thing that was there, the disappointing thing, and it's one of the things you mentioned before, like I don't mind listening on X or whatever to people talking about the cap circumvention. Because I've got a really, really simple way of looking at this, which is the NHL doesn't like it, change the freaking rule, okay? Because the reality is we're in a league where you don't even know why the player is injured. You don't even force the team to tell everybody what's wrong. Upper body, lower body, mid body, left-hand side of the body, whatever the hell that like BS they give, right? That's it. That's all they say. Like if the person's got concussion, it's an upper body injury. You have no idea. So let's be honest, there's only really a few people who know what was actually wrong with Mark Stone. No one in the NHL does. Like no one on NHL.com does. They know what Vegas told them. They don't know any more than that. There's no inside knowledge or anything like that. So when you've got people who are like me and you, so we're just giving our opinion. We're not, we're not NHL insiders. We're not sat there next to Cassidy, or we're not sat there on the operating table next to Stone watching the operation happen. What we're giving is just an opinion. So then when you have actual journalists giving what is effectively an opinion with no facts to back it up, I think that's where this becomes slightly dangerous, where people start talking about things about, it's very convenient that Mark Stone just came back. And you're like, well, look, we can say that on a personal podcast, but you can't say that if you're NHL.com or if you're on NHL Tonight or whatever. And you obviously know the person that I'm pointing at here, but because... And it's not that person's wrong. It's just you have no facts to back it up. So therefore you can't, in that position of power, you can't say that, because what you say matters, and it changes people's opinions, because people think whatever you say must be true because you're on NHL.com. Right. So that means that there is a response, like go back to Spider-Man, right? There's responsibility that comes with that power. And one of those things is not saying stupid stuff. Yeah. So I didn't like that, but I go back to what we talked about before. Every time there's any hatred towards Vegas, I think every fan should smile, because it means you're relevant, it means you're still good, and it means you're still a threat. Because if you weren't any of those things, they wouldn't be talking about you. Yeah, plenty of other teams, the NHL Cup Playoffs and LTIR, the only ones they talk about are the ones that matter. It was Kucherov and Tampa before, and obviously it's Vegas now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of why I think you see fans kind of embracing, I've certainly embraced the sort of evil empire narrative. Like if, there was a journalist who called Vegas the evil empire, and it's like, great, if that's what you want. Like, and honestly, the league should be careful. I don't think fans realize that what they're actually doing is giving the team fuel. They're giving the players fuel to play harder and play angrier and do better. It's like, so people actually kind of fueling the fire in some ways, and making, it's sort of, we joke about the whole evil empire thing. You sort of joke about like the Star Wars reference, like let the hate flow through you and it'll only make you stronger kind of thing. And, it's all tongue in cheek and it's fun and games, but there's some truth to that. Hockey players particularly, you kind of poke the bear a little bit when you do that stuff. But I'm conscious of time, Ian. I know you've got some other things you've got to get to today. So real quickly, I know we wanted to just cover real quickly, like an off-season kind of to-do list, and perhaps some reasons that we might have to be optimistic about Vegas for next season. One of them I already mentioned, obviously, which is that a long off season and some time to get healthy and take a mental break, I think will do them some good after the longest of runs, right? They won the cup, so it doesn't get any longer than that last season. So, what are some things we have to be optimistic about? Or maybe we can talk about kind of obviously there's a lot of free agents, that need to be signed.
That was going to be one of my points. I think, to if I quick fire it, we're obviously going to cover the off season in a lot more detail once we get there. So, for listeners, we will cover the ins and outs, our thoughts on who might move, who won't move, all those kinds of things. We'll cover that obviously in a lot of detail.
Once the
and we
cup
want to
has
get
been
your
awarded,
thoughts on that as well as questions. So one of the things we'll be doing in the off season is getting some questions from you, like we did last year, really, about what you think matters and what questions you want to hear us answer around the off season. But if I had to quick fire it, what's the to-do list? Well, the to-do list has the cap situation. I mean, that is McCrimmon's biggest headache for the next couple of months, which is how do you get it all to fit? And a very, very quick summary is I looked at Cap Friendly whilst we were on this cast because I was like, I wonder how much cap space they've got for next year. Answer, nothing. So there's a lot of $897,000 is what they've got to play with.
True.
And they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or admittedly, one of them's a goalie who they'll probably let go. 8 players to sign and 800,000 to do it. So, they pull rabbits out the hat before, but the reality is there's going to be some moves. So whatever Vegas looked like on the opening day of the 2024-2025 season, I'm telling you now, it will look very different to the team that is there today. But that's fine. That's absolutely fine. The other to-dos, in my opinion, they need to sort the goalie situation out. We talked about at the beginning of this year. Logan Thompson has 1 year to go. Do you move Hill for the cap benefit next year? Could be a good way of doing it. Gives you $4 million back, and Hill would be hot property because he's on a really, really good contract and he's a really, really good goalie. There are drawbacks to this, of course there are, but the goalie situation I think needs to be resolved because they can't go into next year with Hill and they could, but if they go into next season with Hill and Thompson, then they're kicking that can down the road because at the end of next season, they're going to have to make that choice. So if they go with the two goalies this next season, then obviously there's some pros and cons for that, which we can cover later. And then the reason to be optimistic, and this podcast is not sponsored by the Vegas management before I say what I'm about to say, but I think it's the Vegas management, right? Because I think they've proven to me over the last 2 or 3 seasons, they can make tough calls when they have to. Don't want to bring Fleury back up, but they've made tough calls when they've had to. Mm-hmm. Okay, they've made big moves when they have to, and they are committed to winning cups. And I think the reason to be optimistic is nobody in that locker room is sat there saying, well, that's our window. They're there going, okay, some reasons why it didn't work out this year, but we're going to retool. We're going to probably make some moves, and we're going to set ourselves up to be we want to win the cup next year. And I think that's the reason to be optimistic. The window is not shut for Vegas. And the management will do everything they can to keep it open. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason to be optimistic.
I completely agree. And if you look at teams past, the Penguins, the LA Kings, teams that were dynasties that won more than one cup, it wasn't always back-to-back. It's been done. Tampa did back-to-back, right? I want to say maybe the Penguins might have done a back-to-back at one point. Yeah. But Chicago won some that were spread out, I believe. Yeah, and they were during their window. They won 3, right? But they were spread out. LA won their 2 cups in that window were also spread out. They weren't back-to-back seasons. So I completely agree with you. I think Vegas still very much has the potential to be a dynasty. And I think they will most certainly probably be contenders again next season. And you're right. We probably have one of the best, if not the best front office in the league. This is all part of the journey, right? It's adversity. You're not going to win the cup every season. No team is. It would have been nice to see them go deeper. But yeah, I'm optimistic. The line, of course, the roster is going to change a bit. But leave it to Kelly McCrimmon. And I know everybody's worried about Marcia, so I think they'll figure out a way, to be honest. I know the talk is that Marchessault's probably gone. It was interesting to hear Marchessault talk in his postseason presser and McCrimmon, and they're working on it. They're trying. Marchessault wants to stay in Vegas for the rest of his life, and the team wants to keep him. It'll just be a question of whether the money can work out or not. But I wouldn't put it past Vegas to figure out a way. So, yeah, we'll see. Right? You never know how those things go, but yeah, a lot to be optimistic about. Tough to exit first round. I know Knights fans everywhere and anybody who listens to this show is probably still licking their wounds, but On the bright side, we can now watch playoff hockey that is stress-free. So, because let me tell you, that was the most stressful series I've ever watched. So part of me is relieved that it's over, whether we win or lose. But, well, on that note, we will not be posting as frequently. We're not going to release episodes as frequently going forward. We normally do not in the off season, but we won't go completely silent. We might have an episode around the draft or once the off-season trades start, something like that. We usually pop out 1 or 2 episodes in the off-season. So we'll look forward to that. You'll be able to see us in our usual places, YouTube and X. But thanks for joining us this season, folks. It's been a great time. We've loved watching the show grow and getting to know a lot of you as our listeners and our viewers and our subscribers. And we're looking forward to doing this again next year. So for the last time this season, JP and Ian signing off. Take care, guys. Stay safe. Enjoy the rest of the playoffs, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.